All right, so today we are going to start looking at really a big change in Jesus's ministry. We're going to be looking at a time of private preparation. And as we do this, we will see, again, we're going to see an abrupt change. And that's one of the things that is kind of a goal for how we do this class, so that you will be able to see um, the context that surrounds everything that Jesus is doing and how that fits together. Now, as we do that, there will be you're going to have some insight into the context here of how these pieces go. You're going to have an experience potentially of hearing other people teach the gospels that doesn't line up, and I want to explain that a little bit. And it's also a place for humility. So many teachers, myself included, in a point in the past, haven't taken the exercise to go through and put all the gospels together and look at the life of Christ before they teach a gospel. They're just like, okay, this week we're going to go through, or this month, the year, whatever, we're going to go through Luke or Matthew, John, whatever, and they stick to this typical Lectio Continua that we do, verse by verse. They just start at 1:1 and they go to the end. And as they do that, they'll see parallels and they'll go look at those parallels in the Gospels or in other commentaries, what have you, to get details about that event. It doesn't help frame it, though, in terms of the overall context and how the Gospels fit together. What we're doing in this class is how all the Gospels fit together. So we're not just looking at parallel accounts, we're looking at how all the puzzle pieces fit together. And so this is one area where you'll hear people in the future teaching, and they're going to go from the feeding of the 5,000 and so forth, and they're going to move on. And it's going to be missing that there's a big shift in the context. And Jesus's motivations are now different. And so I'm just letting you know that now, because it's one of the things that we're trying to do with this class. If I could just wave a magic wand, I'd say everybody has to do this before the class, before they, not me teaching, they have to go through the exercise before they teach a gospel. Because I think about how much things I got wrong teaching gospels in the past before I put it together like this. All right. There's really 3 lessons in here. We might combine it to 2. We're gonna have a retreat to Phoenicia that we're gonna look at today. We're gonna have a retreat to the region of Caesarea Philippi next week, and then we'll have Jesus paying the tribute tax and the disciples debating who's the greatest. I may combine 18 and 19 together to some degree, so we'll see. So today we're gonna start looking at private preparation. Private preparation. What is private preparation? Well, basically, up until this time, Jesus has been very public in his ministry. He's been in Galilee for the last 18 months, saturating that territory with the message about him being the Messiah and the King of Israel. But he's been rejected. He's been rejected 2 times. He was rejected when he was the unpardonable sin, when they accused him of working through the power of the devil, and then he started speaking in parables. Jesus was rejected a second time, more fully, after the feeding of the 5,000. We looked at that last time. The next day, Jesus was given the bread of life discourse. Everybody rejected him for the most part, and caused him to turn to his disciples and say, "Are you going to leave me too?" Or his 12. The disciples who had followed him were leaving. So today we're going to begin, and we're going to be looking at this transition and overview, and then the retreating to Phoenicia, the feeding of the 4,000, Pharisees testing Jesus, and a healing at Bethsaida. So remember, I'm going to use 4 here. Again, when we did the quiz, we said however you break these up, it could be a different number, but there's 4 major phases to Jesus' life that are recorded in the Gospels. We began looking at preliminary events. These were the events of Jesus' birth, his childhood, John the Baptist coming onto the scene, Jesus is being baptized, Jesus going into the wilderness. Then we saw Jesus' public presentation of his ministry. It started with Jesus' 4 to 6 month period in Judea, this 18-month ministry in Galilee, which we've just concluded. And now we're entering into a third major phase of Jesus' earthly life. And this is preparation for the cross. He's going to spend the first 6 months of this time doing private preparation with him and his 12 apostles. He's going to follow the next 6 months with a period of mixed focus. This is going to be where he's going to spend time in private with his disciples, and he will have some public ministry going on. And then it will conclude with the Passion Week. The final phase will be post-resurrection events. So on the timeline, chronology-wise, right now we are in late March, early April of AD 32. 1 year from now, Jesus will be on the cross. And so we are looking at the last 12 months of Jesus' earthly life. Now, up until now, as I've said, Jesus has been very public about his ministry. Uh, he's been trying to draw crowds. He's been doing miracles, healing people, teaching. And everything he's done has been to entice people to come and learn and hear about him. So much so now that wherever he goes, crowds follow him. He goes across the lake and people run around it to catch up to him. And so Jesus really can have great difficulty in trying to be alone. But now his ministry in Galilee is coming to an end. And it came to an end with these 2 great moments of rejection that I shared with you, this unpardonable sin and the feeding of the 5,000. And so now Jesus is seeking privacy. Now that he's been rejected, okay, it's time for this shift in approach. And I need to start preparing for this next year so that I die in the right time. So he's going to seek privacy. And his primary purpose is to get time alone with the 12 so that he can teach them. And he's going to teach them some things which, one, he has never mentioned before. He's going to teach them some things that are going to be extremely difficult for them to accept. And he's going to teach them things that are going to confuse, anger, and even scandalize them when they hear it. And the first thing he's going to tell them is that he is going to die. And the second thing he's going to teach them is no kingdom now. And this is going to come to a shock because they've found the Messiah. They know who he is. When he walked across the water, they said, "We know you are the Son of God." When they were rejecting him, we talked about my life verse last week. Peter said, "Where are we going to go? You have the words of eternal life." They know who Jesus Christ is. And so, how is it that their Messiah could die? And this is going to be something they're going to struggle with until it happens. So, how does Jesus get away? He's going to go to places where Jews won't go. He's going to be spending his time primarily among the Gentiles. And now he's going to these areas. If he's going to these areas, not to go to the Gentiles. Let's don't get this confused. He's not going to go to these Gentile areas to take his ministry to the Gentiles. He's still primarily for the lost sheep of Israel. He will do ministry in these Gentile areas. He has done some already, and he will do more. But his main purpose here is not to go and carry his ministry as he has with the Jews onto Gentile territory. That will happen after Jesus dies. That's what the book of Acts is about. That is about the gospel message spreading and going into Gentile areas where the message of Gentiles can be saved, not by becoming proselyte Jews. Gentiles can now be saved as Gentiles. That's the message of Acts. That will happen, but that's not now. That's not in the gospel message before Christ dies. Here, he's going away. He's going to these Gentile areas because he wants to get away from the Jews. So he's going to start with Jesus' retreat to Phoenicia. And so let's start with looking at Matthew. So Jesus went away from there and he withdrew to the district of Tyre and Sidon. And a Canaanite woman from that region came out and began to cry out, saying, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is truly demon possessed." But he did not answer her a word. Now we'll pick it up here in a minute. But first, I want to start with looking at what we're told so far. Jesus went from there, that is Galilee, Capernaum, and he withdrew into the district of Tyre and Sidon. Where are Tyre and Sidon? Along the coast, exactly. See, can I? Yeah. So here's Tyre. Sidon is up there. And I'm going to show you another map as well. I think I've got it in the North Regional map. Yes. You can see Sidon. So he was here, here in Capernaum, Bethsaida, this area, primarily in Capernaum, where he's based. Now he's gone all the way over to Tyre and all the way up to Sidon. He's gone a long way to get away. And that's what he has to do to get alone, is he has to go all the way over here. Going back to Yes, the 12 are with him. The 12 are with him. He's going to come up, he's going to go Tyre, he's going to go up to Sidon, and he's going to cut back across, and we'll see this here as we continue. Now, he went out from there and withdrew to the district of Tyre Sidon, and this woman who is a Gentile, and Mark makes this clear. I was in Isaiah earlier today. We are in Matthew 15, and we are going to be in Mark. I think it's going to be. We're going to be in Mark 7. So there's Matthew. Mark 7. Okay. So Jesus got up from there and went to the region of Tyre. He entered a home. He wanted no one to know of it. He didn't want anyone to know that he's in his house. Yet he could not escape notice. See, Mark's telling you, it's revealing the purpose. He did not want anyone to know he was there. Because even in Tyre and Sidon, people have heard about Jesus. That after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. Now, the woman was a Gentile, so it's clear she's Gentile, of the Syro-Phoenician race. And she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Now, often I'll pull up the Greek here. I'll just tell you, when I see pull it up this time, I'll just tell you that the word here is the word, it's a form of the word erotao, to ask, request, petition. It's in the imperfect, an active, indicative, imperfect. The imperfect is like repetitive action. What this means is this woman was repeatedly, literally, Jesus, please. She's begging him, begging him, begging him. This wasn't a one-time request. And what's significant about that is that Jesus didn't immediately respond. It's kind of like he's ignoring her. It's like he doesn't want to do this. And so she's begging and she's begging and she's begging. And the disciples are actually going to react. He was saying to her, you know, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. Let me see, I want to go back. Matthew had that detail. Oh, yeah. And his disciples came and implored him, saying, send her away because she keeps shouting at us. Yeah, you got this woman, her child is possessed and she's helpless. And she knows Jesus can take care of it. And Jesus is not responding. And the disciples are like, come on, this woman's just bothering us. Send her away. Because I was only sent to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. I'm here for the Jews, not for the Gentiles. And the woman's response is tremendous. She goes, well, Jesus responded even more, and because she's like, Lord, help me. It's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. And she said, yes, Lord, but even the dogs feed on the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Like, Lord, just give me scraps. Just give me scraps. Dogs eat crumbs off the floor. Give me scraps. And Jesus said to her, oh, woman, your faith is great. It shall be done for you as you wish. And her daughter was healed at once. Now, the thing happens here is that he healed somebody. And so now, I mean, he can't stay because, again, it's going to draw crowds and attention. So he has to leave. So again, he went from the region of Tyre and he goes up to Sidon. So we're even further away. And then he's going to go from that area and he's coming across and he's going to go back to the Sea of Galilee. He's going to go, so back to the map. He's gone up, he actually went all the way up to Sidon and he's coming across to the Sea of Galilee. And he's going to come down around into the Decapolis region, kind of following the blue arrow. Just should be up here higher. And it's going to come down and he's going to go down into southeast Sea of Galilee, down in this Decapolis region. A lot of miles, a lot of miles. And there's a map I should have opened. I've got it right away. So remember, the Decapolis, this big area right here, it's not ruled by one of Herod's sons. And what do we know about the Decapolis region? What is key to the Decapolis for us to know? Gentile. Yeah, it's a Gentile area. It's 10 Gentile cities under Roman rule. And so he's going on to do this. Now, as we do that, I'm going to come back to this and talk about it in a second. But as we're leaving the Syrophoenician woman, I do want to add one thing. And that's something that David Smith, if some of you may be reading his book as we go, but he does have a comment here that's very notable, talking about this reluctance that Jesus had to heal this woman. The truth is that his reluctance was not due at all to the fact that the woman was a Gentile, but wholly to the circumstance that he had gone to those parts in search of seclusion. He desired to be alone with the 12 and impart to them the instruction which they so much needed. And it was a feeling of dismay that he observed the approach of a suppliant. He foresaw the consequence. I'll throw this up there. Sorry. He foresaw the consequence of granting her petition. The fame of the miracle would go abroad, and he would presently be surrounded by a crowd, sufferers craving relief, and others who came only to gaze and admire. Therefore, he would fain work no miracle, and he would have been no whit less reluctant had the supplicant been an Israelite. There's nothing racial here. He's like, I'm trying to get away. I want to spend time with the disciples by 12 because I got to teach them. And so he couldn't do it. And so now he's going back around. They've left, they've retreated from Phoenicia. And as he does that, we're going to look at Matthew. Okay. So he left Tyre, went to Sidon, back to the Sea of Galilee, to the region of the Decapolis. I'm going to show you that picture. And now we're going to go to the feeding of the 4,000. There we go. Feeding of the 4,000. So now we're going to come here. In those days, again, there was a large crowd, and they had nothing to eat. I'm missing. I want to miss something. He heals someone on the way. So he went to the region. He came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee with the region of Decapolis, and they brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty. And they implored him to lay his hands on him. And here's a detail, so I wanted to back up and not skip it. Look what Jesus does. So again, he's in this Gentile area. They brought this man to him to heal. Jesus took him aside from the crowd and put his fingers into his ears. After spitting, he touched his tongue with saliva, and looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, he said to him, Ephrathah, that is, be opened, Aramaic. And his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. Now, Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself. Again, he didn't want this to be public. Like, I want to take this guy, I'll heal him, but I don't want it to draw a crowd. I don't want to throw gasoline on this fire. There's people already coming to me. I don't want it to turn into a madhouse. And he goes ahead, he pulls him aside and heals him. And then he gives them orders not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. That happens everywhere. We've seen it before. It's still happening. And it's like, of course, it's like, you're going to tell. And how do you hide it? I can hear, I can speak. And they were utterly astonished, saying, he has done all things well. He makes even the deaf hear and the mute to speak. So now we come to the feeding of the 4,000. And again, it's in this Gentile region. It was established by Alexander. It's governed by Roman leaders and not one of Herod's family. The name Decapolis stands for 10 cities, Deca meaning 10, and polis meaning city. And as I said, it's on, and as I showed you on the map, on the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee, in that region there. And again, Jesus is going to Gentile areas, not to minister, but to get away. But he really can't get away. He just can't. So he's healed this man that is deaf that we just saw, even though he wanted to get away and be alone with the 12. And now he's back in the middle of a crowd, a giant crowd, and now it's a crowd of Gentiles. And we're going to talk about here the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 are different events. So, like going through the feeding of the 5,000, I'm not going to go into all the details, but some of them. So in those days, when there was a large crowd, and they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I feel compassion for the people because they have remained with me now 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way, and some of them have come from a great distance. And his disciples answered him and said, where will anyone find enough bread here in this desolate place to satisfy these people? And he said, how many loaves do you have? He said, 7. So again, they're going to do like the feeding of the 5,000. They sit down and they break them, and they got some fish as well. And when they're done, verse 8, they ate, were satisfied because they were full. And they picked up 7 large baskets full of what was left over of the broken pieces. About 4,000 were there, and he sent them away. Immediately he enters a boat with the disciples and came to the district of Dalmanutha. And when we look at the um, account in Matthew, Matthew adds some details. He's going along. Again, we talked about these people that are coming up to him. There's crowds that are being healed because they can't leave Jesus alone. And Matthew tells the account. But one thing that Matthew mentions in verse 39, sending the crowds away, Jesus got into the boat and came to the region of Magadan. So it's different than Dalmutha. At least the name of it is. So let's talk. We'll talk about that in terms of reconciliation. So, a couple of things to look at. And that's the question. Are the feeding of the 5,000 and the feeding of the 4,000 different events? Or is the feeding of the 4,000 a different perspective of the same event as the feeding of the 5? Basically, are these two different events, or are they the same? And they are different. First off, the feeding of the 5,000 is in all 4 Gospels, where the feeding of the 4,000 is only in Matthew and Mark. They occur in different locations. Feeding of the 5,000 was in Jewish area north of here, and with Jewish people. This is in the Decapolis, in the Gentile area with Gentiles. So different locations, different people. The two events also use a different Greek word for the word basket. In the feeding of the 5,000, the word used for basket is for like a bushel basket, something that would be normal, typical size, similar to a picnic basket, such that Jews would commonly use to carry bread and such. But the feeding of the 4,000 uses a different word for the word basket. It's actually kophanos, where we get the word coffin from. It refers to a large basket. It's more like a hamper, a laundry basket. And it's big enough to carry a person in. When Paul was let down over the wall at Damascus in Acts 9, he was put into one of these types of baskets. But these types of baskets were predominantly used by Gentiles. So we have lexical, geographic, and chronological reasons why these are different actual events. There are also different circumstances around them, and different crowd sizes, different numbers and quantities of loaves and leftovers. But the kicker is Jesus himself actually tells us that they are different events. So we come into Matthew chapter 16. They got into this boat, and they're going to cross, and they're going to talk about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, and we'll come back to it. But they're going to get back in the boat, and Jesus is going to warn them, saying, watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. And they're not going to understand this. And he'll explain it. He's going to use what's happened. He says, verse 9, do you not yet understand or remember the 5 loaves, the 5,000 and how many baskets full you picked up? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many large baskets full you picked up? How is it that you don't understand? So Jesus is referring to these are two separate different events. So if you ever read a commentary that puts them together, you just say, well, Jesus said they're different. So that one's real simple. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Pharisees and the Sadducees because they get together. Is there a question? Oh, okay.
You gotta explain the difference between Magadan and
Oh, yes. Yes, I am. How? Okay, oh, yeah, because we're going to leave there. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's coming. That's coming because that's where they're going. So this is where this is going to happen. So they got in the boat and they went to the region of Magadan. And so here the Pharisees and the Sadducees came up to him, and testing Jesus, they asked him to show them a sign from heaven. But he replied to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky? Basically, discern the weather, but cannot discern the sign of the times? An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign will not be given except the sign of Jonah. And he left them and went away. So, a couple things here. After feeding the 4,000 and the 12, he got in the boat, goes across to the region of Magadan. It's also called the district of Dalmanutha. Now, Schlegel, in the Satellite Bible Atlas, where we get these pictures from, said Jesus returned to the Jewish territory at Magdala, uh, Magadan. And let me show you the map again. Private Galilean ministry. We have Magdala, and you can go to Magdala. I've been to Magdala on the tour, so it's there in this area. And then we have this. Let me see. Okay, but some texts of Matthew 8:10 have Dalmanutha, an Aramaic word probably meaning harbor. So there's that aspect. But Bookman has a conjecture here that makes sense because Mark says Dalmanutha. Mark was a fisherman. No, not Mark. Mark's gospel is really Peter's account from his oral history and recollection and his teaching and lectures on this that Mark recorded. So Bookman's conjecture is that, Peter, being the source of Mark's content, and remember, being a fisherman on the Sea of Galilee, is pointing out a very specific place that those familiar with the area would know exactly where it was. So that's probably what Dalmanutha is, because they're fishermen. This is probably like the name of like a fishing area or a place on land where you would turn in that locals would know. So outside of Colorado, if we're talking about Denver, the people who know Colorado maybe but aren't really familiar with it like a local is, you might say Denver or downtown. But if we're talking to someone that may know or just talking about it, we may say Lodo or we may say Rhino. Now, someone in Nebraska is going to have no idea, well, most people in Nebraska have no idea what Rhino is, right? That's Riverside North. Now, we talk about Mile High outside of Denver, everybody thinks we're talking about the city. In Mile High, we're never talking about the city when we're talking about Mile High, we're talking about the stadium. It's those kinds of things. Um, and, we talk about I-70. Well, we might talk about Floyd Hill, the tunnel. So that's what's going on. There's the general Magdala, broad, specific area. Peter spent his life, a large part of his life on this lake, fishing it, Dalmanutha, very specific place.
Just to grab the obvious, Magdalene or Mary Magdalene.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Okay. Now, let's talk about this Pharisees and Sadducees. First off, notice that the Pharisees and Sadducees came up and testing Jesus. Remember what I said the very first week of this class? Maybe it was the first 3 weeks. We talked about the sects of Judaism, by week 3. The Pharisees and the Sadducees hate each other. This is like Republicans and Democrats in DC going out for a picnic. Now, of course, I'm pretending there really isn't a uniparty, right? And so that's what this is. It's like, okay, they're in cahoots. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are going out, even though they normally would hate each other and not work together at all, to go up and test Jesus. And so here again, we just see that this coalition is coming together. And we have to have that coalition because remember, Jesus has to die on the cross. He needs to be dead. He needs to die in a way that cannot be refuted. People want to say, Jesus, they came and took him off the cross, or he didn't die, or what, all that stuff. Jesus died. You don't survive Roman crucifixion. That was just understood. Because if someone ever lived, you kill the soldiers who crucified him. They know how to kill somebody. He's dead. So Jesus needs to die in a way that's totally irrefutable. And to do that, that means the Romans have to put him on a cross. Romans don't care about Jesus. He's not causing an uproar. The Jews don't like Jesus. So the Jews have to get Jesus on a cross, which means the Jews have to get the Romans to do it. And in order for the Jewish people to get the Romans to put Jesus on a cross, it has to go through the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin includes Pharisees and Sadducees, about evenly split. How do you get the Sanhedrin to work together to send Jesus to the Romans to be tried? They got to be working together. It's just like a lot of times we don't care that the Republicans and Democrats get along or not, because then they're not passing legislation. Somehow they still manage to spend money. I don't know how that works. But, okay. It's where they all get along. They usually come up with really bad legislation, right? So that's kind of what's going on here. All right. So we talked about this. They can discern the weather. They ask for a sign. And again, it's crazy because Jesus has been doing signs all over the place all the time, and he's not going to give them one. And Mark 8:12 says this is frustrating to him.
Uh,
Yeah.
you mind, explain what does Jesus mean by
This generation, that's that time, the time period, the people alive in Israel at the time that Jesus came. That generation. That's what he's talking about. So then we're going to get here in Mark 8, the Pharisees came out, and here just mentioned the Pharisees, arguing with him, seeking a sign from heaven, sighing deeply in his spirit. You were seeing this humanity. This is just weighing on him. This is frustrating. God doesn't get tired. God doesn't get frustrated like we do. Now, he may not be happy with things that we do. I'm sure, we have this anthropomorphism of God being grieved and such. But here we see the humanity of Jesus again, where he's sighing deeply in his spirit. This is just exhausting him and frustrating him. And he says, why does this generation seek for a sign? Jesus is the sign. Everything he's done has been a sign. He says, truly I say to you, no sign will be given to this generation. And leaving them again, he embarked and went away to the other side. So back in the boat, and they go across.
All right. What does he mean by no sign will be given to generation that collectively speak?
Yeah, he's not going to do any more signs. He's not doing it anymore. He's stopping the miracle business. Now he'll do some, but he's not going to give them what they're asking. He's not going to honor their request. He said, other than the one sign which he mentions in which Matthew records, he's going to die and be going to the ground for 3 days, 3.5 days. Now, the disciples had forgotten to take bread. And so again, we talked about this because this is where he says, be wary of the leaven of the Sadducees and the Pharisees, or leaven of the Pharisees, and explains it to them. And he goes, "Do you not yet understand?" And they do understand. They finally came in and they realized, and Matthew tells us. Okay. After he talks about, hey, don't you remember the baskets? How is it that you didn't understand that I did not speak to you concerning bread? Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees. Then they understood that he did not say to beware of the leaven of bread, but it's a figurative expression of the teaching of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So let's see, we're going to stop here. No, we've got a healing at Bethesda now in Mark. Okay. So there's one more place that Jesus can go. So far, I mean, he comes into this little port that Peter knows about and called Dalmutha, or this area that the locals would know. And so Jesus, he gets there, and the Pharisees and the Sadducees show up. So it's like he goes he goes to the Decapolis. There's crowds. Anywhere he goes, there's crowds. Or he goes across, and it's like, why did they go back? Well, maybe they went back to see families. They've been gone a long time, a while, and it's quite possible they want to kind of sneak in and see family and then sneak out. But the Pharisees and Sadducees show up. And so now it's like, where can Jesus go? And so he does decide one place that he wants to go is up in the region of Caesarea Philippi. We'll talk more about Caesarea Philippi next week. But let's just say it is, it's basically a party town for Romans and Roman military folks. So you're on leave, and people want a break. Like if you're in the military, you get to go someplace. Think of it like Vegas. Think of it, Vegas for veterans. Today, I'll just show you this. So here's the Hula Valley. Here's I want 12 too. I want modern borders. So just so you know, I mean, today this place is surrounded by Syria and Lebanon. And I've been up here. I've been in the Golan Heights. I've been up to Caesarea Philippi. And when you go up in here, there's places where you can go up on the hill here, little foothill, or this was, and you see, you look, oh, there's Lebanon. And you can see where they have their skirmishes. You hear these missiles coming in. Like, I can see where they were flying, where they're flying in. I know that area. I looked at it. And then you can turn around and look at the other way, and there's Syria. And we've taken the bus down this road, and you're like, okay, there's Syria right there. There's no fence between them. And so, this little sliver is Israel. And so this is where Jesus is gonna go, up here. And that's today's border. But I mean, it's the way it was broken out politically isn't significantly different because Tyre and Sidon were part of Syro-Phoenicia, not part of Israel. This area is part of, Syria, Damascus, not part of Israel. So Jesus is kind of really trying to get away. Dan is up there, absolutely. Yep, yep, yeah. Dan is up there. Like, oh, not in Dan. Well, Dan's pretty close, but yeah. Okay, let's go to this healing for the man at Bethsaida. This is just in Mark in 22. So they come to Bethsaida. That's where I showed on the side of the lake before they turn up to go to the Hula Valley. And they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought him out of the village. After spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, he asked him, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I see them like trees walking around." Then again he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him to his home, saying, "Do not even enter the village." So, this is very interesting. So, again, they come to Bethsaida, and they bring out, they recognize Jesus. They bring someone to him to heal, and he takes him out of the village. Because, again, it's kind of like what we saw before. He doesn't want to draw, he's trying to get, he's going to go all the way to Caesarea Philippi. He doesn't want people following him up the Hula Valley, and he's trying to get away. So he's going to take him out of the village and do this privately. And there's a couple of interesting things about this account. First off, is that Jesus does it in 2 steps. What? Did Jesus have only half the power this time? No, of course not. And what has happened every time Jesus heals somebody and tells them, "Don't go tell anybody." They go tell everybody. So picture how this plays out. Like, okay, come with me. They go 2 or 3 miles out of town. "You want me to heal you?" "Okay." "Oh, I do step 1. Can you see? Because this guy's blind." I can kinda see. I can kinda see." "Do you want your vision all the way back?" "Yeah, I do. Yeah, I do." "Don't go back to the village." "Okay." Boom. What happens with this guy? Says he sent him home saying, "Do not enter the village." You know what? Every time Jesus says that, we always have these other verses that tell us that they immediately went out. We don't have this here. There's no record of this man telling anybody. There's no record of this man going to the village. There's no record of crowds coming. So I suggest Jesus did this in 2 steps to underscore, "Hey, I want to heal you, but I don't want to have a crowd." And so appreciate it. Thank you. Now go home. Don't go through the village on the way. All right. Yeah, like I said, and apparently it worked. No record of crowds coming to Jesus. And in the next verse, He is with the 12 in the villages of Caesarea Philippi. Jesus went out along with the disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi. On the way he was questioned. On the way he questioned his disciples. So he's going to have this conversation. Finally, after all this time and all this roundabout travels, he's going to have the opportunity to have the deep conversations he wants to have with his 12. And so that's what's going to. All right, we got 2 minutes. Any questions or comments on anything I shared today? Yeah, Don.
You get a sense that like these Pharisees and the Sadducees that keep showing up, do we have any indication from the Bible that they're maybe following him, or are these like locals who see an opportunity? Jesus is in the region, they come in, play their part, and then go back. Is this group that's kind of following him, gathering?
I think it's that group gathering information, because if Jesus were to ever do anything that would be grounds for the Romans to get involved, they want that to happen. So,
Sorry, this word generation bothers me. If that is the local people at
that's the whole nation of, I don't want to say local, it's the nation of Israel at that time.
how do you reconcile that with Matthew 24? Jesus says, "Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away till all of these things take place."
That's simple. It depends on what this refers to.
Well,
Okay, we're in Matthew 15, 16 today. We'll get to all of it discourse, but
the word
But-
generation that's
I know, but you got to look at the word this as well.
right.
All right. Yep. All right. Let me shut down the stream and